The story begins with a dungeon, a place that appeared when the gates opened. This place is shrouded in mystery. Many monsters dwell there. It's a battlefield hunted by hunters, superhumans who have inexplicable superpowers and show bogatir strength. It had been 10 years since the monsters had appeared along with the dungeon. One by one, the hunted ones appeared, and they adapted to the changed world and evolved. It's a world in which there are hunters and ordinary people. Gradually, they got used to each other, and the popularity of hunted people increased dramatically day by day. But there was only one way to become a hunter: tower. It has in it from the 1st to the 100th floor a system whereby the higher you climb, the stronger you become. All hunters are summoned to the tower before their awakening. There they become superhumans and transform into hunters who fight in the dungeon. Wise hunters urge, climb the tower as high as you can. The higher you climb, the more power you get. This is one of the main steps in becoming a hunter. However, those who couldn't even pass the tower tutorial are more than 80%. Those who drop out on the 10th floor are level E hunters. Those who make it to the 20th floor are level D hunters. Those who have reached the 30th floors are classified as level B, up to the 40th floors to the B level, up to the 50th floors to A level. Well, Jack is the bravest of them all. He's an example to all the hunters, in his dreams. Now standing in front of the THM floor, planning to conquer it. He had the confidence to do it, like he'd done it 100 times. He saw something on the phone that shocked him. He saw someone who inspired him and made him angry at the same time. What a bastard! He's a handsome man. He's got it all. He's got it all! Jack thought when he saw Kim Hansen. He's a C-level hunter. The number of floors Kim Hansen has climbed so far. Not everyone could achieve that in such a short time. Many of the people he started with are still downstairs, and they watch Kim with unrelenting fascination. Jack's sweat beaded up. He couldn't believe it. 61st floor! Kim has reached the 61st floor of the tower. Someday I'll be able to get the tower's call too, Jack thought to himself. It's the only way out for him. It was the only way he could end his miserable life. Then his eyes filled with sadness and sorrow. Jack thought of all the people he had loved, but had tragically lost one day. Mother and father. The people who raised him to be a hero. Always believed in his strength and never taught him to give up. Friends with whom Jack conquered more than one tree in his hometown. With whom every adventure ended with a funny story that remained their personal secret. The thought never left him. If, too, could climb the tower, then Jack's life would be the same. Suddenly he was pierced by a sharp, savage pain. Jack didn't realize what was happening at once. What the? Jack thought, as he was immediately addressed. Again! All he does is blare into his cell phone. Jack turned around and saw a group of older men. Well, of course, that's the only problem you clueless fools have, one of them sentences, pointing a finger at Jack. And just like that, his dreams become reality. Even though he doesn't know yet what hell awaits him. As one of the elders turned to Jack, "Don't you know we'll be entering the dungeon soon?" And immediately added, "If you don't want to be fired, work hard, you stupid inventory man." Jack realized that he wasn't going to have it easy. That creep is prying again. A kindly man among the new guests said to Jack, "I'm sorry. Sonhak can't choose his words." Jack immediately said, "Oh, that's all right. He's trying his best to be strong and fearless." "Good," Sonhak said, barely containing his irritation. He couldn't stand the newcomers. And they began their trek. Each of the team had a different plan for the hike. Jack was brought forward. He went through the chosen path first, though it made him suspicious. Why did they put me up front? What if a monster shows up, like cannon fodder or something? Jack's mind kept going back and forth. But this guy inspires calm, like he knows that whatever happens, it's gonna be okay. He was the only one who reassured Jack. It's still good to have this guy on the team. But the anxiety never left him, and for good reason. From nowhere, a huge, heavy shoe hung in the air. It caused so much shock that it was impossible to contain his bewilderment. Jack was flying downhill at the speed of light. He didn't understand why this was happening to him. His hatred of the world was growing even faster as he approached the ground. But only an "uh-oh" was heard from Jack, and as he lay on the ground, his comrades watched him, and no one tried to help him. And in just a second his anger came out. Jack yelled, "What are you doing?" He didn't realize what was happening. Suddenly the earth shook. Everything sparkled and with new colors. It was as if Jack and the crew had split into two camps, as one of them uttered, "Mana defense," but it was obvious. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, the long-awaited return of dogfighting!" exclaimed one of them, preparing his phone to film the spectacle. But who will be in this fight? The red-headed rapist versus... someone apparently said. Just then, a wild beast that clearly did not inspire calmness appeared. It is a hound-type beast monster. Although they are low-level genus monsters, if they gather in a pack, they pose a great threat. Well, well, place your bets on who's going to win, came from one of the boys. As the combatants familiarized themselves with each other with a glance, it was a trap, Jack realized. It had been so long since there had been a dogfight. It would be a long time before we could see such a spectacle before our eyes. Put an ordinary human or hunter with a monster and make them fight until one of them dies. This is the essence of so-called dogfighting. Jack knows it's not legal. So even if he's lucky enough to win, there's no way these creeps will let him live. Oh shit, that's why they have a higher reward than the others, Jack realized. There was no turning back now. Gathering his will in his fist, he made a decision, to whom the beasts were already preparing their claws to leave a mark on Jack's body. Everything, living and non-living, shuddered at their power. A second, and they were on Jack, teeth bared and flames in their eyes. Jack took the challenge like a true hero. From out of the blue, Jack fought back the wild beasts with his knife. They were not to such a repulse, and first scared the beasts away. Of course, the fight left the first wounds on Jack's body. They were deep enough to remember forever that moment. But it was then that his strength began to grow. He immediately began to ponder how to fight them. This was his chance to prove himself, and prove that he was worthy of climbing the floors of the tower. In truth, too, the beasts were gaining strength for another attack, for they felt that Jack was not afraid of them. But the guys didn't calm down. Every now and then they shouted, "Cheer up for the sake of the spectators who bet on you!" Yes, you stupid porter. You'll just get it from them like a fool. This only made Jack hate them even more. He wished he could kill them all for doing such things. As someone shouted, "Do you want to be monster food like your family?" It was as if Jack had been switched, his eyes filled with hatred, anger, and a seal. "Bastards!" he shouted. This fight was making more and more sense to Jack. Now he was fighting not for his life, but for the memory of his most loved ones. Then he finally made up his mind. "You freaks know you're going to die today," he called back to them. Oh, how scary. "I think you're going to die today, don't you?" exclaimed the ringleaders. They were sure Jack would fail and they'd see a great show. However, he had a different plan for this fight. He had a secret of his own that scared everyone around him a lot. Jack started blowing his whistle sharply. At that moment, the opponents realized that this fight would not go unnoticed for them. Their eyes read prayers for forgiveness. The monsters heard a sound that began to drive them crazy. They abruptly began to feel even more thirsty for blood. It was like everything around them turned bright red and fierce. There was a smell of blood and pain all around. For the monsters, there were no longer any enemies. They saw only prey to be driven and devoured. "Hey! Hey! What are you doing? You're out of your mind! Stop it quickly!" they shouted with hope of rescue. But it was useless. The process had been set in motion. The older of the two continued. "Stop causing aggression and stop, dumbass!" But Jack was no longer to be stopped. He needed to defeat the monsters and destroy the offenders. "Give it to me!" they shouted, trying to stop Jack. They seemed to feel their doom approaching. The monsters are ready to attack, and without wasting a second, they began tormenting their prey. One by one, they attacked everyone who stood near them. Foam flew from their mouths, their eyes full of blood and rage. The defeat of the common people was in the air. Already at that moment, everyone around them realized that there was no way for them to escape. "Oh shit," even Jack said, not expecting such a reaction. The monsters drove their prey into a circle. They began to clamp in a vice, and the tension was building with every second, and Jack was the only one who could taste victory. "I told you so," he said, looking at this development. "Just so you know, you're going to die today," hovered in the air, and was addressed to mortals. It was Jack's first victory. He savored it. In a second, however, he froze. His gaze shifted. He heard the monster in front of him, and now it's already flying at harmless Jack, who's just changed from bliss to humility. Jack fought back with all his might. But the monster bit into him harder and harder, and though our warrior was strong, he couldn't fight him. The fangs had gotten to Jack's bones. The battlefield was filled with pain, blood, and death. The monsters were getting drunk with every gulp of blood. Only blood and chunks of flesh flew in the air. The mud of the forest mingled with the bodies of mortals. There were no more moans. Even Jack had put his thirst for revenge down for now. He was exhausted after his encounter with the monster. The monsters killed everyone. Every one of them took a piece of flesh. In this fight, it was the monsters who won. However, it was only over Jack that they only gathered in a pile and growled, but they did not attack again. Though Jack had already begun to say goodbye to life, his strength was leaving him. I tried my best to survive, Jack pondered, lying bitten by monsters, but I end up becoming dog food, he continued in his head. With his last strength, he generated these thoughts in himself. Still, it's such a relief that before I die, I've repaid those bastards. A thought flashed through Jack's mind that put him in bliss, and just that thought alone gave Jack a hope that lighted his whole way forward, even though he hadn't counted on it. Conditions met. Like a computer game, a message appeared for Jack. From now on, this life would begin to gain new momentum. The tower invites you. Jack received the coveted invitation. A whole world of magic has opened up before Jack. It is now up to him to take all his strength in his fist and prove that he is worthy to pass the levels of the tower. Here they are, the coveted doors to the levels that Jack has to go through. Everything is flooded with new colors for him. The tower welcomes him. All around, everything looked like in dreams. Huge windows from which the light poured in. They gave hope of a glorious journey. Jack lay unconscious for some time, but the light of the window was so persistent that he began to come to his senses little by little. "Oh," Jack said disconsolately. He didn't yet realize what lay ahead of him. His mind had not yet sobered up from the shock of it all. It was only a second later that Jack began to rise from the floor. His body was breaking. He didn't realize anything. The last minutes before he lost consciousness flashed through his mind. He remembered how the beast had attacked him. The pain of the bite raced through his body again. For a moment, Jack couldn't believe what had happened. I'm not dead," he said in surprise. "The tower invites you." Jack received an invitation to go through the next floors. "I was summoned to the tower and resurrected for coins?" Jack asked in utter amazement. Droplets were already trickling down his forehead, either from fear or incomprehension. But it didn't take long for the answer to come. "While in the tower, whichever way you die," the tower began to answer. "For the coins you got," she continued, showing Jack a coin. In Jack's mind, the tower immediately replayed the picture of a battle to the death. It only conveyed the pain one man could inflict on another. "It's possible to come back to life," showing scary pictures of how Jack could die in the tower on one of the floors. Answered him. Jack was deeply surprised. "Oh, they said that the number of coins you get is different for everyone, and you can find out the exact number after you pass the tutorial," he said thoughtfully. "Greetings, Master. Welcome to the tower." There was nowhere to retreat to. Other messages from the tower arrived. Current location, St. Floor. Tutorial site, Set TH Floor. Already here, he realized that what would be before was nothing compared to what awaited him. And then he got an assignment. Climb the tower. It was easier than it looked. "Now, looking at the status window, I really believe I've gotten into the tower," said Jack. Only now was he beginning to believe that his dream was becoming a reality. Everything depended on him. How smart and quick he was. "For the sake of this day, I was learning the information that the government and the guild provides," Jack recalled. A picture from the past came to his mind as he was researching ancestral books in the middle of the night, and has been diligently preparing, also practicing, Jack proclaimed, proving that he was ready. It's impossible to imagine how proud he was of this moment. "I finally have an opportunity." Thoughts overwhelmed Jack. He was eager to show what he could do. As soon as the tower window opened in front of him to his new assignment, Jack gathered all his will in his fist. He knew he could do it. All he had to do was concentrate hard. Taking a confident step forward, Jack knew for sure he wouldn't miss this chance. But he didn't know how disastrous it would be for him. He didn't know what might be waiting for him on this floor. And though his look was determined, he was not a little nervous. St. Floor entrance. All around, the incredible colors of the greens gave Jack hope of winning this round. Within a minute, an opponent came into his field of vision. A horribly green and disgusting goblin. Yes, it was his first mission on his way through the tower, slaying a goblin. Just like the guide from the government and guild said, "This is a hunt for one goblin," Jack pronounced. There was bliss on his face. It seemed that if he knew everything by the book, he would be victorious. "Well, Jack, we'll see about that." "Kiruruk," said the goblin. He was fully prepared for battle with Jack. and was looking forward to sharpening his claws on Jack. Jack's face immediately changed. "That freak?" he asked with frustration. The task didn't seem so simple anymore. Their gazes devoured each other. They were like two bulls, ready to fight. It was as if they were waiting for the command to start. "Well, if I deal with him right now, I'll be fine. I'll kill him right away," Jack reassured himself. He wanted to prove his strength, but he was a gentleman at heart. Waiting, there was no time. The goblin had already shown he was ready for battle, and he made the first move, and then it hit him in the face with all its might. His teeth came off. Everything started to bleed. It was the goblin's first defeat. Jack immediately went on the attack. He was determined to show who was the master of the situation. Sparks of anger flew from him. Jack's blows were accurate. In a second, the goblin was already lying on the grass, ready to accept defeat. It turned out Jack was pretty good with swords. With one motion, he created a wind of danger. And now he's ready to slit the goblin's throat and get through the first floor. Even Jack is surprised he's doing it so easily. But he's fast. One deft swipe of his sword and the goblin is dead. Jack stands over the angry but slain goblin and tastes his first victory. He went through the tutorial. One-on-one slaughter of the goblin. "Easy," Jack said proudly, getting up from the ground. The goblin's blood was dripping down his knife. "That's easy to handle." Before Jack could finish, he was immediately disturbed. He wasn't ready for this. Another goblin's blade slid into his hand. His eyes were filled with a thirst for vengeance for his comrade. Jack remained utterly bewildered. "Ah!" Not realizing what was happening, he exclaimed. Now already broken, he lay on the ground next to his first slain goblin. The new goblin seemed too huge and invincible. His eyes glowed, and his muscles seemed about to burst from the strain. "They said there was only one. Oh shit!" Screamed with a mouthful of blood Jack. The pain was too great. He couldn't even open his eyes. That's when Jack's coin fell into the account. It saved him from certain death in the first stage of the battle. Jack must learn his lesson, otherwise, he'll never be a hero. Coin deducted. The screen lit up. It was undeniably a chance for Jack to pass the test. The tower moved Jack to the save point. "Apparently, I've had a coin deducted from me and resurrected again," he thought as he opened his eyes. For the first second, it wasn't clear if he was happy about this outcome. But one thing was clear. He still had a lot ahead of him, but Jack couldn't accept it. "The rules of the tutorial say there's only one goblin," he wailed. The feeling of injustice never left him. Then, he pondered. Some plan seemed to be brewing in his mind. The conclusion was self-evident. The government and the guild spread false information? Jack couldn't believe it. Thoughts were running around in Jack's head. He felt cheated. "Why?" he asked. "I don't know what they're up to. But there's nothing I can do about it now," Jack reassured himself. With all his will in his fist, Jack prepared for battle again. With his experience, it seemed he could not be broken by any goblin in the world. "Gotta get up!" hovered in the air. Jack was already waiting for more goblins. Alone in the beautiful green forest, Jack waited for the third hour. "But they still don't show up," Jack told me. He began to reason. "If you act hastily, you could get hit like last time." Jack had already learned by experience. "I don't know how many there are. I don't know how they will attack, so you have to be careful." In every rustle he sensed danger. Jack seemed ready to attack the leaf that rose in his direction. Jack spotted him. "There he is!" he shouted. And there was a goblin running between the trees. But he did not attack Jack. Then our hero decided, "I'll follow him." And so the game of hide-and-seek began. This time, Jack was smart. The goblin led Jack to some strange place. It was filled with mystery. There was nowhere to go. Following him, Jack spotted him alone. As expected, another goblin. But the questions only grew more. But what is it?" Noticing the statue, Jack thought. Now his eyes were filled with interest. "It looks like a statue. Maybe it's an artifact," Jack thought. But they said there were no artifacts in the tutorial section. It was no longer clear if it was a good thing that Jack had studied the guides. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Hunter Kim Hansen appeared. She was the one who said, "There are hidden treasures and opportunities in the tower. Only by getting them can you climb high," she explained to Jack. Then Jack decided, "Okay, no matter what happens, I'll get him and see." Jack's determination was consuming everything around him. No one would want to go under his knife. It was then that he made a battle for the treasure. Boldly, sharply, and with intent, he swung at the goblins. Their rage overpowered in an instant. Goblin drool began to fly in all directions, and it was only a matter of time who would defeat whom. Now all that was heard from the beasts was kirurururuk. These sounds were not clear to Jack, but it was not so important to him. After all, he had a goal, and he did not intend to be distracted. Then Jack uttered, "Kirak," and added, "This is the place for stabbing me, you creature." He had a duty, and he was bound to fulfill it. Blood poured all around. There were cries of pain, but no pleas for mercy. Then the message reappeared. Goblin 2-2 massacre. It meant that Jack had passed the first floor, and now Jack is standing at arm's length from the treasure, and nothing and no one will stop him from taking it. He was still thinking, what is that statue? It seemed to Jack that the goblins were protecting it. As soon as Jack picked it up, the statue immediately moved. He was discouraged. The entire building was filled with bright tongues of flame that did not burn, but mesmerized Jack. It was all happening because of the statue. It was as if Jack had unsealed it with his touch. It was his first successful assignment. Then the tower told him, "For the first time in all the North, you have gotten your hands on a statue of Lunatus." This was something new to Jack. He realized then that there was still too much he didn't know. The next message was, "Destination of Lunatus, a unique, hidden quest. In order to get it, you should fulfill these instructions. Destroy goblins, get the statue of Lunatus. Only by fulfilling these requirements you can get the reward." Jack didn't know what kind of reward. Anyway, our hero was blessed on his onward journey. And though he had no idea what awaited him there, he went on his journey up the floors further. One of the first honors was eyes looking up at the stars. This was an indication that Jack had reached the sea level. These eyes are a real boon to anyone going through these tutorials. They reveal all the hidden information. Jack couldn't believe his happiness. For a couple seconds, he couldn't believe what was happening. "Getting sea-level powers?" he exclaimed in shock. Sue, the highest level now generally recognized, is the Twil A level of Kim Hansen, a sea-level hunter. The thought never left his mind. It was running obsessively through his head. "And I got sea-level powers that surpass that," spun Jack around in his head. "That's crazy. Really some crazy." Luck seemed to be on his side. Now he faced a new challenge. But how to use them? It's only in the corner that Jack finds hidden information. And there it was, the coveted message. First floor passed. It was the first great victory. Now Jack faced a new challenge. He set himself the goal of collecting all the hidden rewards in the tower. There was warmth and mystery all around. Jack, filled with excitement, gathered himself on the next floor. There was a slight playfulness in his eyes and hope for a bright miracle. However, all was not so rosy ahead. And there it was before Jack's eyes, the coveted entrance to the second floor. He'd only dreamed of it before. Jack sensed from the first second that it wasn't going to be sweet. Everything around him glowed. Pain shot through his entire body. He realized at once that it was time to get to his feet. He watched every rustle around him. He suspected that he might be attacked from any corner, as suddenly a kobold appeared in the distance. Jack immediately began to make a night of it. As if running was his best weapon. Already with a wounded shoulder, he flew through the wild forest. There was only one thing on his mind. Those bastards from the government and the guild. Already here, on the second floor, he realized that everything he had studied was worth questioning. As he ran with all his might, he directed all his anger at the governments and guilds. They didn't tell him the kobold was using weapons, did they? And they were already thinking about how he could defeat the enemy. After all, the massacre of the kobold was beginning. And Want the Forest showed with all its spirit that it was on the player's side. The shadows left riddles in which lurked danger. Jack continued to run wherever his eyes took him. Branches, dust, and wind flew from beneath his shoes. Everything indicated that he was determined to win. Now he was beginning to realize how stupid he had been. I already got caught on the first floor. But again, I unknowingly trusted the guide, he thought. It seemed that the conclusions had been drawn. Gritting his teeth, he realized, of course I should have thought of the variable. He took his first step toward the enemy, pulling an arrow from his wound. However, it's worth getting better first. Jack is lucky to have that opportunity. It's easier to fight with new strength. As soon as the potion began to take effect, he immediately felt a change. Whew, that's better, Jack said. Hiding between the trees, Jack realized, this creep has a good sense of smell, so he'll find me right away. He was sure he needed a plan. His weapon looked very dangerous, how about… Before he could finish, something began to burn his palm. The beautiful, golden liquid that enveloped his hand left a lot of questions. Oh, what is it?" Jack uttered in utter bewilderment. At that very moment, his eyes activated. Interestingly, when activated, they shone brighter than the sun. They immediately gave away that it is the sap of the tree that exudes the odor. It was the one that the kobolda found difficult to recognize. One would have to be a fool not to use such a clue. But the first thing that struck Jack was that his activated eyes could search for information in any situation. "Wow. Depending on the situation, they even look for relevant information," he said. Putting his fist together with his prized juice, he confirmed that it could be used. Just then, his adversary appears on the horizon. He's out for blood. He is ready and confident in his abilities. But he couldn't find Jack. He searched and fretted because he couldn't find him. His gut told him he was near, but there was no scent, even though Jack was already watching him from the tree. The longer the kobold wandered, the angrier he became. But then, in the middle of the forest, something he had never expected came upon him. Jack came at him with all his might. He attacked him so suddenly that everything around him took on fire. It was obvious from Jack's face that he channeled all the power he had in him into that blow. Perhaps even he hadn't expected this. His hands were taking such a swing that there would be no chance of victory for anyone. Everything around him was a red flame of blood, pain, fear. Once Jack had finished his attack, and the kobold was defeated, he made sure the tree sap was working. "And he really can't smell it," he said. His victory was the completion of passing the second floor. Instant notifications came from the tower that the tree sap experiment had succeeded. By the way, Jack was given 300 points for passing the second floor. But the surprises didn't end there. Just then came a clue that you could take the nail from the kobold's ring finger. After all, there might be something good in return. Jack stared at his fingernail, which now looked much more attractive. Something good? Jack was tempted, which is why he easily ripped out his fingernail. Of course, there was some blood involved. But nobody said climbing up was going to be easy. Once the player did everything, the second floor immediately became safe. This opened a portal to the new floor. New gifts awaited him at the new station. "They give food for hard work, too," Jack marveled. As he removed his hunger, Jack found confirmation for himself. As people say, when you get past the second floor and a portal forms, he shared his observation. Immediately, confirmation came from the tower, a reward for passing, community activation. Jack was overjoyed. And right in front of him, the gateway to the community, the main North Korea, opened up. Jack was immediately notified of the community experience. It said, "Hey you assholes, who told you there was only one goblin on the first floor? Fucking die of constipation for fuck's sake." He immediately fell in with like-minded people. "Just as I thought. I'm not the only one who's been through this," he was convinced. The answer didn't take long. "Stop hysterics. Don't you know it's forbidden to make a fuss here? Such a moron should be smashed. What floor are you on? There was only one goblin. Are they selling drugs somewhere?" Jack, however, had not expected such a turn. But why do they have such a reaction? They don't believe in what other people say at all. Then he decided there was no turning back. "Okay, I should join too," he thought. His finger flew sharply into the screen to support his fellow members. His face was filled with bewilderment. His nickname became Klashivaya Princesa. He was encouraging everyone in his message to succeed in the tutorials. Of course, you might find that funny. However, that was Jack's plan. If you get people's attention by posing, there immediately began an active correspondence. He immediately began to give confirmation. "You're a good man, Klashivia Princesa. No, fairy." The next immediately joined in. "These cooking goblins, I thought they die easily." But there were also those that mocked him. "It's natural for goblins to gather in a pack." Jack was happy. There are comments from those who have also gone through it. He was confident and asserted, "If you try hard enough, you can make friends." Tests don't wait long. That's why everything around Jack turned bright new blue colors in a second. That meant only one thing: entrance to the third floor. It's insanely interesting to see if our player will make it this time. This assignment was as interesting as possible. Jack had to break through the traps, and no one cared about his fears. The panic never left him. "Traps?" Jack asked. He was discouraged. Right in front of him, 3 huge jets of fire burst through the slabs. They were scalding just by the sight of them. To say Jack was scared was an understatement. But each tutorial made him stronger. Just a poem away. He was ready for unpleasant surprises. But the traps appeared so abruptly that it was hard not to get caught on some sharp stake. With every step, Jack was on the verge of death. With every moment, he was taking a risk. He had to retreat to save his life. "Oh shit, I almost died," Jack exclaimed. But he had no idea what awaited him ahead of the tunnel he was to pass through. The false guide did say to distinguish between traps by putting your hands out in front of you. The trust was becoming less and less, and the situation was becoming more and more complicated. But the hero was serious. "It won't be your way, you bastards!" Jack shouted. He immediately remembered his superpowers and activated his starry eyes, hoping that they would tell him how to get past all the traps. At that moment, his eyes glowed with blue fire. Once he activated his superpower, he would become incredibly confident in his abilities. Now it seemed as if the traps themselves were ready to yield to him. The dark, gloomy place was no longer so. Jack believed that getting through this floor was possible. There was nothing he couldn't handle. He encountered huge bombs, flaming arrows that could pierce to the heart. The further Jack went, the more dangerous the traps became. Sharp as fangs blades that wanted to get the player on served from all sides. But Jack had his advantage. Thanks to his eyes, Jack was able to defeat all the traps. This helped him to pass the 3rd floor. For this, he gets points. As soon as Jack finished going through the level, he thought, why did they make the tutorial so difficult? He was on the verge of death. "Oh, I'm going to die." As a reward for passing the level, Jack received a special meal. Thanks to it, he had 200% regeneration. Nothing seemed possible for him now. Jack wondered, maybe they do have a conscience. They gave me a hearty lunch this time. As he ate, he couldn't stop thinking about the tutorial he had successfully completed. "Phew, those traps were really scary," Jack said. But he didn't yet know the horror that lay ahead. Suddenly his lunch was abruptly interrupted by something terrible. Jack began to fly downward, not realizing what was happening. He no longer felt safe. Turns out the traps weren't over. Ahead of him awaited a colorful fire show. Jack needed a real miracle to stay alive. "Ah!" he screamed. He tried to run away, though the fire was catching up with him faster than he could get away from it. At that moment, Jack gathered all of his strongest abilities and activated the level C superpowers available to him. In the corridor of traps, he now had a leading position. He was in no mood to lose. Jack realized that it was only because of the ability the tower gave him for passing the floors that he could deal with the traps. "If I didn't have this ability, I wouldn't be able to pass, even with 100 coins, Jack piped up. As soon as he passed the 3rd floor, his stats were strung up. His strength equaled 5, feign 7, physical strength 6, magical strength 5. That's what saved our player. Jack couldn't get his hopes up. It seemed that he remained angrier. He himself noted, "They say that magic power is born, so with stats like mine, it seems to be the highest among those who pass the tutorial." Jack began to suspect himself of genius. "Maybe this is the talent," he exclaimed. He was even more confident now. "Let's try to pass further with this good mood," he decided to advance. His interest in going through the floors was growing more and more. Each floor had a different atmosphere, the neighborhood of the 30th floor of the tower. It beckoned with its glow, its tall houses, its grandeur. Everyone wanted to get there, but not everyone survived the journey. You could tell by looking at this guy that you were in trouble. His scarred face and hard stare said his experience wasn't for everyone. If he wanted something, he got it. You could tell he was a professional killer. The higher a player climbed, the more the guild and government knew about him. Since our Jack knew a lot of secret information, he would become prey. It was only a matter of time before he was hunted. He knew for a fact that they would try to kill him. As suddenly, somewhere on the 30th floor, a young boy in complete shock brought the bad news. "Brother! Brother! Did you see the publication in the community?" he said in desperation. "Someone is causing a stir in the tutorial section channel again," he said. Our formidable fellow stopped smoking his cigarette and put it out without looking. A serious conflict was brewing. He was discouraged. "What? My head hurts enough as it is." "Well, show me," he said. Deep down, he didn't want to kill anyone. But this mess couldn't be left alone. Once his brother showed him what was going on in the community, it was clear that there would be a battle. Now, all the secrets of the tower were at risk. And it was all because of Jack. The more he wrote, the more he became of interest to the government and the guild, which meant there were plenty of people willing to take his head. The elder smashed everything around him with all his might. He used the fire from his hand as easily as if it was worthless. It was scary to imagine what he could do to someone who revealed secrets. "Brother!" the younger man shouted. He was scared, but he knew he had done the right thing. Once the older man calmed down a bit, we were left alone in the room. He was making a plan to destroy Jack. He was all on fire with anger. He knew that if he did not settle it, his head would be blown off. He was so angry, he was ready to kill Jack. It seemed like nothing could stop him. Jack sensed that someone was talking about him, but he didn't realize the rage his posts had aroused in the community. He had made enemies, even though he wanted to help other players. He received an announcement that he had been given the title of Conqueror. It said that a conqueror is one who leads his followers. It's the one who knows the most secrets, the one who challenges. Points are given for that, as well as for published walkthroughs and reactions to them. Jack was surprised, and didn't expect at all that he could get the rank. A title. Everyone wanted it, but not everyone succeeded. You had to be brave to tell the truth. Jack was interested to see the comments. First the credentials and now the ranks too. It's a good thing I used to write texts about passing, Jack said. The comments were amazing for Jack. He saw how his stories helped other players. Jack rejoiced. It's probably thanks to these guys responding positively to my publications. It was the only way he could get the titles. He knew his stories would help others. It's amazing how opinions coincide. I think maybe we'll make good associates later. Such thoughts crept into Jack's mind. However, besides them, Jack noticed that there were other comments. They said he was wrong and everything was easy enough. There were many who accused him of being a liar. You can see the ones who are always muddying the waters. Are they from the guild or something? Jack thought. Jack didn't understand what was going on. Are they worried that they'll be exposed for spreading false information in collusion with the government? Jack suggested. Jack, however, had his own plans. Well, what can you do? I'll expose all your lies, he plotted. We'll try to get on my tail and find me, he said. Not yet knowing what lay ahead of him. He knew for sure that to defeat the guilds and governments, he had to be strong. This fact awakened the beast in him, and within a second, our Jack was flying into the fire. It was sudden and unexpected. Only invisible forces could have saved him. It was a great flame. It was a secret scroll. It revealed a secret jewel that had incredible power. It was this jewel that saved our player. And this was a new assignment for Jack. He had to climb a rock. Now he had to show all his strength. Jack got a clue about a dark blue tree. He had to tear it out by the roots, and only then could something happen. Our player felt he was omnipotent and began to actively pursue the requirements. He wished to win in everything, and everything that happened to him was proof that he was right. There's not a single match with the guide, he shouted happily. At the same time, the further he went, the more disappointed he became with the guide. You didn't tell me that the height of the cliff is controlled depending on the number of artifacts available. Jack was killing himself. He was saved by all the prizes he'd once gotten. While Jack was killing himself, a magic stone caught his eye. He noticed some writing on it. Interest won out. When Jack picked up the rock, he saw that it said, John Trailer. He was shocked by the find. This is the stone of the great sage who rose to the infloor. This stone could give the power to pass the tutorial. This John was so brilliant that he created an artificial creature and was going to take over the tower. As our hero listened to the story, he could not believe that he had reached the 92nd floor. Jack exclaimed. Jack was already angry and puzzled. He didn't understand what was going on. Wasn't the highest floor mankind had ever set foot on the 64th floor? Oh, and there's a homunculus. What's going on in the tower anyway? There seemed to be new changes every which way. The tower always seemed to be something mysterious and unattainable. And it turned out that there were those who approached its majesty. What's the point of pondering this now? I won't learn anything anyway, Jack thought, and walked forward. He folded the new artefacus to himself as well. As a new portal opened before him, he knew, if I go up, I'll find out on my own. So he continued on his way. Gathering all his strength into a fist, Jack prepared for battle. Now for the last floor of the tutorial, he said, and that was the entrance to the 5th floor. Jack's job was to take down the boss monster. The plot seemed incredibly beautiful, but because the monsters were hidden, it was dangerous. Jack had to find all of them and kill them. However, the tower is on the player's side. Deterioration. Are they adjusting the difficulty level to some extent? Then it's worth a try, since you can use skills, Jack said excitedly. And he was right. The monster adjusts to the level of the fighter. That's when he sensed something wrong. Out of nowhere, a huge, scary, strong monster stood before Jack. The fighter had no idea how he could defeat it. Holy crap, isn't that a bit much? Even Jack himself didn't believe he was capable of winning. But there were only two ways out, either victory or death. The monster quickly assessed his opponent. He realized that he was too inexperienced. Jack realized that in front of him was a third highest class warrior fish. He was shocked, thinking it wasn't fair. Without wasting time, the warrior fish began to attack Jack. Drool and slime flew in all directions. Jack immediately received his first defeat. The monster was so fast that the fighter didn't have time to recoil. Ouch! While the player was wondering how he could stay alive, the fish kept attacking. No one would have wanted to be around at that moment. Jack continued to feel sorry for himself. Is this really the light version? Its level is quite different from the monsters I've fought before. It was a game of chase, and the monster was leading. Jack pissed himself with fear. He didn't know what to do. Eventually, he realized, I definitely can't beat him with my bare hands. I definitely need skills. The clues came to him immediately. They had located all the skill boxes. This was his chance for salvation. Jack immediately went to the location where the boxes were found. 2 skill boxes of the lowest and lowest level were waiting for him. So once Jack reached the location, he decided he would take the ones closer to him. Jack walked to the glow from under the stone. He hoped he would get some useful skills. Please, let there be useful skills, he begged. Once Jack had chosen which boxes he wanted, he began to use his magic powers. Only they could help him open the boxes. While the player was dealing with the boxes, the monster was looking for him all over the forest. He was furious and ready to tear the fighter apart. Jack immediately used the first skill he came across. It was Smoke Screen. Even though it's a level F skill, it's just right for this situation. I've blocked that bastard's view, said Jack. As soon as the smoke began to disperse, the fighter ran with all his might. The monster became even angrier from the player's antics. The player realized that smoke wouldn't keep the monster away for long, so a new game called Race began. While Jack was running away from the fish, he managed to find another box. It was a real rescue for him. One turned out to be that the monster could jump so high up that the fighter's speed didn't help him from this attack. As soon as the fish landed, everything around it rose up. Because of the smoke of dust, neither the monster nor the fighter could be seen. It seemed like it was the end, but it was a clever maneuver by the monster. He took advantage of Jack's inexperience and weakness. That's how he ended up being held hostage by the fish. Oh, blimey, he's awfully fast, Jack thought. If it were him, the others would have already begun to say goodbye to life. Since Jack was a real fighter, even with the monster's paws, he tried to throw a punch. Here's at least this. He threw his sword at the fish. That was the first blow for the monster. It was the first time he felt that someone could hurt him. Jack felt this as his victory. However, the fish slime flew at him, which was very nasty to the player. The monster immediately threw Jack backward. Now he was stunned. Fish was showing with all his might that he was ready for a proper battle. At this point, Jack managed to open up the middle-level box. It was another hope for victory. It turned out that the monster had thrown Jack into the box with his punch. Thanks for throwing me right into the skill box, he grinned. A notification immediately came from the tower about what kind of box he had gotten. It was a firebomb. Level C. Jack was overjoyed. For a moment it seemed to him that he had already defeated the fish. The fighter immediately tested the bomb on the monsters. Everything on the site glowed with fire, and it seemed that nothing would survive. But that didn't help him. The monster didn't have any damage. Didn't even give me time to rejoice. This fish has a terrible temper. Jack resented it. The monster continued to attack Jack. Then he entrance let his trident emitted current from it. Well, Jack had his plan, so he smiled. As soon as the fish lost control, Jack seized the moment and plunged a knife into its paw. The monster didn't see it coming. Hurts, yes? The player asked. He was happy that he had managed to hurt his opponent. The monster's pain was so intense that he couldn't hold back his tears. Perhaps no one had ever hurt him like that in his life. "It'll hurt more this time!" he shouted, and prepared to strike again. Trailing off, he launched a firebomb at him. "Take that!" the fighter shouted. You could just see the fish burning. Within seconds, the monster was already kneeling in front of him, burned through. Already at that moment, the formerly evil and invincible was vulnerable. "Ooh, the smell of fried fish," Jack commented with a grin. He was pleased with his victory. The player looked at his palm, from which the fire was coming, and could not be more pleased. "There's nothing like fire to catch a landed fish," Jack exclaimed joyfully. He then gave another fiery strike. Then the monster finally bowed to him. It was a victory over an invincible foe. It's hard to imagine how Jack felt at that moment. The tower gave him 1,500 points for passing this level. If there had been companions around, the applause in his honor would not have died down. Jack sat across from the monster burning and couldn't believe what he had done. Defeated, stretched from his mouth. He was happy, he was proud of himself, and he celebrated the moment. I wondered what was in store for him next. Jack made it to the 5th floor. His bounty is based on the level of the monster he killed. And as we already know, the monster he killed was not weak. That's why, when Jack looked up, he saw a burning star in the sky. It was clearly a good omen, but the light from it was so bright that the player could not look. He had to hide his gaze from those rays, as suddenly he was attacked by a previously unknown animal. "What is it?" shouted Jack. That was his reward. For passing the 5th floor, he got a pet, and it was a frog. What on earth is this reward? He resented and didn't understand why some frog could be a reward. He didn't like her right away. As soon as he looked away, he saw that there were many. He didn't know what to do next. As it turns out, this frog has a hidden power. This cutie immediately fell in love with its new owner. Now it was up to him to accept the gift. Stronger than me? The tower immediately suggested that the frog had powers Jack could only dream of. The instructions said that she could bite if the master couldn't win the battle. Is she really stronger than me? Jack couldn't believe that a little frog could help him. Then this lovely creature let out a purple slime from her mouth. She did it to show what she could do. Once the slime reached the grass, it burned through it. It was an indication of her strength. I admit it, she's stronger than me, Jack was convinced. He resisted, however, and would not take her with him. Since there is no law but obliges to be together with the pet, he said. He thought she was easy to get rid of. You have a nice life here, and I'm out of here, he shouted to her as he was about to leave. Well, you'd have to be a real idiot to do that. Frog didn't understand why he wanted to leave her, but she knew for sure that she would go through this journey with him. As soon as he turned his back to her and she immediately began to quack. She won't spit at me, will she? Jack was afraid. He had too bad an opinion of her. She immediately jumped on his neck and started hugging him. She made it clear that they were a team now. It was then that Jack realized what her one weakness was. Ah, you get weak when you get pushed away, he told her. After that, they made a pact of friendship. Okay, shall we respect each other? Let's be friends from now on, Froggy, he suggested to her. After agreeing, they walked forward. Now new adventures awaited them. As soon as their team was formed, Jack was immediately congratulated on passing the tutorial. All system restrictions were lifted. Everything before that was child's play. Jack and the frog went through the portal and got to the 6th floor. Jack found himself among the others in the first few floors. He saw a message saying that this was a safe zone, that all the wounds he had received earlier were recovering. In addition, killing was forbidden in this zone. There was no sign of trouble. He was surprised at the number of people, at how different they were. He was even a little pleased to be in this atmosphere. He was terribly curious about what would happen next. Wow, so many who passed the tutorial? His surprise was impossible to hide. The frog next to him only nodded in agreement. Frog, why are you acting like this? We just agreed that we would respect each other, Jack said to her at once. She replied, but he didn't like her answer. None of my business, and you're an impertinent frog, he said. There were a lot of interesting people around them. Ah, but what's your name? I can't call you Frog all the time, can I? Asked Jack. But the frog didn't know what to say to him. Then he realized, shall I, the master, call you? In such cases, again, the advantages are given to the master. The cool super frog belongs to me, and is even stronger than the master. There was no way he could accept that she was stronger. Either our hero is such a joker or he wanted to make fun of your frog, but the name he chose was obviously not to her liking. Dokchun. She sighed heavily. Now you're a super Dokchun frog, Noljak cheerfully resurrected. Though the frog himself still hoped it was a joke, the frog actively started jumping, and the player thought that was a good sign. Oh, you like it so much that you're jumping up and down? I guess I really do, Jack spoke to her. But their conversation was interrupted by an interesting-looking man. Excuse me, he said. He was calm and lanky, smiling sweetly. His face was trustworthy. Did you just come up from completing the tutorial? The stranger addressed them. All right then. I'm Kim Seong-hoon from the Blue Dragon Guild. Take this, white pellet, it's good at healing, assured Kim. He immediately held out this white glowing ball to Jack. This is where the clue immediately came to Jack. It immediately informed him that the white pellet had the ability to edit parts of the memories of the tutorial section of the spell on it. Jack looked at Kim's outstretched hand with utter disbelief. He thought to himself, Oblivion spell? Memory editing? At that, the puzzles began to fall into place. It dawned on Jack, so people's memories were edited? That's why they said I wasn't writing the truth? How could one small pellet do so much damage? In front of Jack, there were immediate reports from the community that some people had no or vague recollection of what had happened. This confirmed Jack's clues. He realized they couldn't remember, not because a lot of time had passed, but because the memories had been erased. Kim's credibility was immediately gone. This was the reason why large guilds and governments were actively introducing white pellets. Jack immediately asked, Mr. Kim Seong-hoon, did you eat it too? In his heart, our fighter hoped that he would tell him the truth and keep him from the spell. However, the man replied, Of course, I am a cipher after all. A cipher is a person who distributes white pellets. Kim noticed that Jack was slow to eat the pellet, so he decided to encourage him. Well, will you eat the white pellet for healing then? Jack didn't know what to do. Right in front of you now? He asked, even though he already knew there was no way he was going to drink that pellet. While they were arguing, quite a number of people had already gathered around them. Kim said, According to guild rules, you have to be in front of the safe, not giving any chance for profiling. A new wounded man was laid down right in front of them. He urgently needed healing too. That's why people found the cipher and asked him to help. Wounded man, hurry up and give me a white pellet. This was Jack's chance for a pellet not to drink. Jack was once again convinced that you can't trust everyone. The government and the guild, they're bastards. Everything was a lie, he said to his frog. And while the white pellet was being pulled by Jack to show Kim how to eat it, the frog took it for herself. That was her first superpower, to stop her master from doing bullshit. While Kima was distracted by the wounded man, Jack managed to pretend to eat a pellet. Cypher looked back to check that the fighter was indeed eating. As soon as the cipher was free, he noted that Jack would be more alert now. He needed to put him on the registry, so the cipher clarified his details. It was all like a government conspiracy. When it was just the two of them, Jack and the frog, he thanked her for saving him. Thanks to you, Dokchin, I was able to get off with a hit, the player remarked. Now he realized why he had actually gotten lucky with the frog. That's what a magic animal is. Did you really have a recovery skill after the white pill? Jack asked incredulously. Our hero never thought only of himself. That's why he hoped that the guys he saw every day would also soon climb to the 6th floor. Gotta write about passing the 5th floor and the white pellet soon, Jack prepared to write in the community. He wanted to warn everyone about what he knew himself, and even though Jack realized he could be punished for telling the truth, he couldn't abandon the work he had begun. I can't lose those who are in league with me, can I? He reasoned. He was satisfied with his work. He had written a good passage. It seemed that now was the moment to take a little break. He gathered his thoughts and decided he could do other things now. Now the rest, he muttered to the frog. But everything around him had a different plan. Abruptly, the book he was holding took off and began to reveal another world to him. Jack immediately got a clue that there was an auction where you can get artifacts. There were things that could not be bought in the store. Well, Jack loved that kind of stuff. He immediately proceeded to make his choice. It was as if he had a blackout. He couldn't be stopped. His gaze fell on the yellow case. It could be bought. Of the advantages of this yellow hull was defense and physical strength. Jack didn't understand what was going on. It's nowhere near as good as this in terms of properties, but why are my eyes reacting to it? Still, I got here through my eyes, so can it be believed? Jack wondered. Though he was confused by the price listed there. Once he bought this vest, there was no limit to his anger. Nah, so this level 10 can cost 2,000 points? Give me my money back, shouted Jack into the monitor. However, the yellow hull was purchased. There was no turning back. His eyes told him it was part of the equipment of a fighter who had made it to the 99th floor of the tower. It was actually an enviable purchase. The fighter couldn't believe his eyes. What? 99th floor? Wait a minute, he said. He took out a gem from his backpack that had been obtained on the 3rd floor, for it had been made by a man who had climbed up to the 92nd floor. And this thing was a man who went even higher. It was an impressive artifact. His eyes told Jack that he could collect the warrior set, which climbed to the highest floor of the tower. Jack liked it, no longer angry that he'd been taken off so many points. Though Jack searched for the rest of the pieces, luck didn't smile on him. I searched, and for all my might, but I didn't find the rest of the parts. Still, I sold and bought some stuff, so that's okay, he consoled himself. As he suddenly found a long sword, it gave him +5 strength. Couldn't have been more pleased. In addition, he got various sub-artifacts. I got artifacts, so now I look like a real hunter, the fighter rejoiced. Well, I'm done learning about the store, so there's one sign left granting authority and modifications. Our guy was growing with each floor. His requests were higher now. The community had trained him in all the services of the system, and Jack had gotten 500 points for it. He was ready for a new challenge. Once Jack's modification was complete, he was unrecognizable. Compared to the guy who had only been through the 1st floor and the guy who was standing in front of us, there was a huge difference. His performance had more than doubled. Even the fighter himself didn't expect such a turnaround. We were facing an adult fighter. The community had a rule that new fighters got a new ability. No one ever knew which fighter would get which ability. Suddenly, abruptly, something strange started happening in Jack's bag. Eh? Why out of my bag? Jack began to ask. As soon as everything brightened, he immediately saw a new box. Getting a box with top-level powers for the first time? Crazy! Jack couldn't believe this was happening to him. There was no limit to his happiness. He rejoiced like a child, like the boy who had been near the tower for the first time. And while the fighter rejoiced in his new abilities, his frog warned of interference. Dokjun warned of the interference of chaos energy. Jack hugged the frog for joy. A hidden quest opened up in front of him. The player didn't realize it. On the screen, the life meter with coins started running abruptly. It was surprising, because the fate of the fighter was being decided. He was shocked. I only had 3 coins left? Jack asked. But the meter kept running, and after a minute it had an infinity sign on it. Infinite? Jack wondered. What did that mean? Suddenly, it hit this idiot. In order to exit the tower, you must either use up the coins or capture the tower itself. Panic was on his face. He started tearing his hair out. It seemed like he was in here forever. Can I get out of here? Panicked the fighter. Jack remembered that it had taken the other hunter a year and 8 months to get to the 610th floor. But the tower told him that time was twice as fast in the tower as it was outside. But that did nothing to appease our player. Oh shit! He was already regretting everything. Even his assistant couldn't figure out how to calm down the host, and while Jack was despairing at his place. Something very strange was happening in the square. Everything has already been checked out. Why do you keep calling us? Wondered the brave squad in utter incomprehension. However, there was a new assignment. Excuse me, we have been ordered to check everything thoroughly. And somewhere in his stone palace, a manager was watching over his own. He was someone one would not want to meet on one's way. The steward watched over the order and secrets of the government and the guild. He gave orders to his servants. Bring the one who wrote the 4th report. At this moment, the already red eyes became hers more brightly. Services quickly found the culprit of the mess and brought him to the superintendent. We brought, they said. The cute, bespectacled man didn't understand what was going on at all. Manager, what's the matter? He asked. Instead of answering, he immediately started beating me with fire and weapons. He did not give a chance to explain himself. His aim was to punish him, so that others would not be punished. Do you know what you've done? The manager asked, the sharp knife he held too close to the culprit. But that was what put everyone in fear. First, you were careless about the order to double-check people without guilds, so the unknown person entered the square without authorization, he said. His anger grew more and more, and everything around him was blacker than night. Secondly, there is the possibility that this unknown person is the one the guild people are looking for, the manager remarked. Third, because you missed him, we can't track him down, he yelled. His face was already too maroon in color. After a few blows, the manager left the poor man. Be thankful I let you live, he said to the one who was already lying faint. Then in the plaza, the manager gave a new order. From now on, you are to block all portals to the 6th floor and find a man named Kim Jonezu, he decreed. Execute! Shrieked everyone standing there. Affirmative! His squad replied. Hatred loomed. Meanwhile, in the guest house dining room. Still, after a hearty meal, both the tension has been relieved and the mood has improved a bit. Right, Dokchun? Jack asked. The frog continued with her speech. She even suggested that they might close the portals. But Jack didn't believe her. No, they can't close the portals. What is this? Their land, he said. Jack began to pay attention to what was going on around him. And at the same time, the freaks from the big guilds they just let go. The fighter didn't fully understand what he should do now. He did overhear one of the conversations, though. What? The portals have been shut down? He thought incredulously. It seemed like he was in a garden. Then Jack climbed the highest branch he could find nearby. It gave him a view of everything that was happening in the square. There, he made sure they really did close all the portals. As soon as he reached the outskirts, he saw the manager's guards leading everyone away from the portal who wanted to go through it. That was the last portal, Jack said. I still don't know what my abilities are, the fighter thought, sensing that something dangerous awaited him. He suspected a battle awaited him, but he was worried. Besides, I haven't fought more than one person at a time yet, Jack pointed out. Then all that's left to do is wait, the player thought to himself as he walked away from the scene. It was hard for him to look at what was going on around him. The players from the 6th floor opposed it. You think because you're from a big guild, you can do this? We should get out of here, they said. The manager immediately pointed out, provoking action and non-cooperation are punishable. The guild guards were afraid that they would have to kill players. Then the steward came closer. He was ready to do justice as he saw fit. Everyone feared him and usually listened to him, for he did not know much about who was right. He stood at the portal and all he wondered was, where was Kim Jonsu? He wondered why no one had found him yet. While the superintendent was handing out orders on the plaza, an order came from the 10th floor. If Kim Jones, the alleged Klashivaya Princesa, comes up, he must be lifted. Then a new order was issued. Good. All guild members, have everyone gather in the area. Once everyone was assembled, the square was blocked off. It was easy to recognize that the manager was nearby. Besides, the manager had a plan of his own. And if I fire a signal rocket, have the waiting group in a couple of minutes immediately assemble. He waited for the understanding in everyone's eyes and said, now execute. But then, something caught everyone's attention. As they made a turn, they saw something explode in the square. It couldn't be ignored. Jack's eyes gave you a clue right away. That the manager is an assassin. If you kill him, the skills he possesses are transferred to him. Also, if you kill him, his assassin status doesn't attach. Not a moment later, the manager was already flying with all his strength at Jack. All he had to do was to take the blow. Everything around was dusty, and there was complete silence. For when the manager took over, no one dared utter a word. As Jack came to his senses a little, the manager stated, it makes no difference, Kim Jones, or Klashivaya Princesa, but if I want to know your identity. No sooner did he continue, for his anger was winning within him. While he was victorious in the situation, he continued his speech. In case you Klashivaya Princesa, if I kill you, the walkthrough will no longer be published. Or like I said, whatever. Everything he'd said to Jack earlier only proved his intentions. He didn't care who he really was. He cared about punishment. Jack was getting a little nervous. After all, the creep was so guessing. He realized he was in for a serious fight. That's when Jack decided to show what he was made of. And the hopeless mindset he has? I'll show you what happens when you treat people and their lives like that, our player began to threaten. As soon as Jack finished his threats, everything not around the square turned an incredible red color. What is that? The fighter wondered. This was the first time he had ever seen this. Then the manager said, I fired a flare so the guild members will come to deal with you. Until then, we'll play around. Oh shit, thought Jack. He was already starting to think about his failure. He just happens to use a flare that costs over 3,000 points. It's many times more expensive than my cheap armor, the player pointed out. Such good for you! You're rich! Shouted the fighter to the manager. After that, the race began in earnest. For Jack realized that he could only run so far. Then began, in truth, an unequal fight. The manager began to attack Jack with all his might. The player had no choice but to fight back, and a new level in their fight began. Kicking. Jack had never been kicked like that before. However, what surprised the manager was also what surprised Jack himself. He was able to stop his kicking. Did you think I'd fall for such a cheap trick? Jack laughed. I recognized all your major skills with my ability, he complimented. And it could be said that this fight was becoming equal. However, the guild members had already been approached by the managers. Jack continued to fight back. He even managed to swing at the manager a few times. And while he was in shock, the fighter threw the first punch. It was gracefully beautiful from the air. However, the manager used a shield. As the eyes suggested, the shield creates a protective screen with magical power. You think such a trivial attack will do me anything? Laughed the manager at Jack. Then how about this? Hung the question in the air. There was so much fire that it was unclear if anyone was still alive. But what was certain was that whoever had released it was quite strong. Jack then pointed out, just a level shield. You can just break it with a level B skill. He stood satisfied, as if he knew he was sure to win this fight. And there stood before him a less daring manager. He seemed to have run out of strength. But the guild is still on the road. The controlling fire rose to the heavens. Just some finished tutorial. I let you play with me, and you, not knowing your place, pounce, said to him. It didn't take long for the answer to come. Jack dodged a punch. The manager regains his footing. The player didn't feel so good anymore. He wondered, the damage got stronger. Did he have a hidden power? Now instead of the manager, the murderer on fire stood in the square. He was to be feared. Jack was startled. Oh shit! Large guilds are like that. What are they like? Artifacts! You bastards! How could you give this to just some sixth-floor manager? He had no idea what was going on, or what to expect next. If confronting something like this, I'd have to prepare for Lost in Arms too, he ironically asked the frog. She supported him as best she could, and it looks like she had some brilliant idea. Dokchun, I trust you, confirmed the master cheerfully. As soon as Dokchun took action, everything around him began to sparkle. It seemed that the master was even in pain. The manager was very excited about what was happening. He shouted after him, Die! Die! However, he stopped the manager's attack. Jack was able to catch his leg and stop the blow. After that, they went into a hug. The manager didn't get the point at all. But it seems that the frog's plan is not so simple. That didn't please the manager right away. What are you doing? Are you crazy? He was discouraged. Jack showed his powers of observation. I noticed you like firecrackers. Firecrackers. There was nothing left of comprehension. As long as they weren't circling the air, there was a glow coming from Jack. It could do damage in a way the manager didn't expect. By the time they landed, he was already exhausted. You asshole, the killer said with all his might. Then the manager asked, You want to die together, don't you? But Jack had his own plan. Nah, I don't want to die, he answered him. Jack smiled wryly and said, Only you will die. And at that moment his Dokchun began to recover. The guild ran up and couldn't believe what was happening. The manager? They shouted. Everything around them was on fire and it was impossible to survive in it. The next thing that all the guild members saw was the manager having all of his artifacts flying off, which was only possible if he was dying. And there they are on the ground, the two of them. All that comes out of them is smoke. And it's a mystery whether Jack is still alive. And whether the frog idea worked. Well, as it turns out, the guild members are a little dumb. They didn't realize what had happened until the very end. They watched in silence as Jack took the manager's magical power. He was more satisfied than ever. Then the guild members realized what had happened. They were terrified because they thought they were next. But all Jack needed was a portal. And now he's sitting by one of the portals, and he's catching his breath. Whew, really almost died, he shared with Daughter. He was so satisfied he didn't realize what was going on around him. It was a useful duel after all. Now I have artifacts with special effects, rejoiced the player. He now has a brooch that doubles his stats, but it can only be used up to the 20th floor. A bracelet of gravity that can control weight with magic. Yup, if it wasn't for you, Dokchun, I wouldn't have been able to win, the master finally assessed. She was very pleased with that. After all, and originally he didn't believe that she could help him either. Of course she was flattered to hear the words of gratitude. But, you can't put a thank you in your pocket, I get it, Jack pointed out. Then Jack bought a special lunch. It had a lot of meat in it, and it improved regeneration. That's what they needed after a fight like that. It's only worth 300 points. Is it to your liking? The player inquired. Dokchun was completely delighted. A guest house in the possession of the guild. The steward wakes up in his chambers and does not understand what has happened. He is in utter despair. His body is racked with pain. He recalls how the fight with Jack went. I lost, he tearfully realizes. His status as an assassin can no longer be restored. In addition to the defeat, he remembered that his skills were lost. Damn, they took them away from me, he realized. He has Jack's reflection in front of his eyes. His life goal now. Bastard. I'll be sure to find you and kill you. The manager can't think of anything else. Furthermore, he stated, as of today, I am resigning as manager. This was a shock to some, but he knew that he had other things to do now if he wanted to kill the enemy. In conversation with his subordinate, he continued, I'm going to hand over the duties to you, so follow me and learn. I'll deal with the other commotion in the square first, the former assassin chastised. Then, having dressed, he specified, You caught the freak that was disorderly in the square, didn't you? The small type was discouraged. He did not know what to answer. He began to mumble. Speaking of that, then he continued. We couldn't stop him, and the portal was breached. The manager went out into the square and saw the full consequences, and while they would gain strength and make plans, Jack had his own adventures. Jack, along with the frog, were already on a new journey. They immediately felt threatened. Everything around them lit up with fire. Players are ready for a new battle. A whole pack of goblins appeared in front of them. They all looked very ugly, their green noses demanding to be ripped off. Jack dealt with each one individually. He managed to wound everyone that passed him. But that wasn't a victory yet. After only a few minutes, he had already tasted victory. The skill gained turns out to be worth using. I fulfilled the conditions for passing in a moment, said the fighter. But it would have been better if I'd gotten a kicking shield. Then maybe go straight to the 8th floor. The hero had become too brave. He was now able to handle everything. However, near the portal, he realized that the 7th to 9th floor was a development plot. This is a development plot, so maybe there's more to it, he wondered. And he was right, though he didn't know it yet. Our hero takes a deep inhale and exhale and prepares himself for more fights. At that moment, he was taking in all that each floor was preparing for him. Jack continued on his journey. He further continued to kill everyone that came in his way. Not a single green monster got away from him. He tackled everything the floors offered him. As it turned out later, the massacre of goblins had several stages. Our player handled them perfectly. Already almost pissed off, Jack finished the fight. Phew. He breezed over the bodies. A new message was revealed to the forward. He wasn't quite sure what it was about. Beginner's kit? Clarified the player. He didn't know what it was, but he needed it. As he passed this floor, he noticed a glowing pill. Furthermore, the message indicated that there was a limit to the growth of stats depending on the type of monster. This could be taken as a hint that it was too early for Jack to get cocky. He wordlessly took the pill into his mouth, hoping that it would help him get through this section. Now I understand why this is a developmental plot, the hero shared. After using the pill, its effect was immediate. Jack felt great. All that remained was to put it into practice. Are they saying that since I ate a beginner's kit, I should hunt, raising my stats? He still believed that something could be free. We've never met anyone so naive. Jack wasn't the same. He planned on sucking every last drop out of the beginner's kit. He wanted to become super strong. It didn't take long for the goblins to arrive. They had already started attacking the player. They were serious. And so this encounter happened. Fire again. This is the meeting between the goblin and Jack. It was all too fast. Jack won in literally seconds. As expected, his scores doubled. He only stopped when everything around him was on fire. Not a single living goblin left in the entire forest. Only then did the tower tell him that he had reached the limit of his stats growth. Jack was satisfied, but not exhausted. Dokchun was even starting to fall asleep a little. Even though a lot of work had been done, although already Jack was thinking about resting, the plot prepared him a duel with a monster boss. This is a unique quest, obtained because I killed about 100 goblins, and I can't see the hidden information, even if I use my abilities, explained Jack. This problem had to be solved by defeating the boss monster. He got a little frustrated when he realized that the powers from the level were not omnipotent either. So he would end up having to find the enemy himself. There are only monsters like goblins in the arena, so we're monsters. The boss is probably one of them too, pondered Jack. He was facing something new. And so the front line was pestered by completely different goblins. Goblins, shamans, champions, value fears, and others. Jack began to ponder. The first-class goblin is very weak, so I ruled him out. And the goblin champion and shaman would probably form a pack in the arena. So it can't be that they can't be seen. He sifted through his opponents. Then he decided he wanted a goblin with jewels. It seemed that he had not expected this in any way. He certainly seemed like a real coward. He had an important goal of his own, to save all the jewelry he had. And while the frog caught butterflies, Jack pondered. Already it seemed the choice was obvious. But it was not in his interest to beat the weak. Then he came up with an idea. "Dokchun, it's time for you to work off your food." With a verse, he appealed to him for help. The goblin immediately smelled something that would get his attention. It was hard for him to resist. Even sitting in his cave, he heard the scent of jewels. It was torture for him to stay still. He was angry with himself. I am bound to go to the smell of the jewels. Gathering his bag, he set out on his journey. It did not take him very long to walk. He was easily happy, for he found what he was looking for. For him, it was a golden frog figurine. But if you looked closely, you would have realized everything. Grandfather sat in the tree happy too. "How much longer do you have to stand? Be patient a little longer," he soothed the frog. "That's the joy. Here it is. The goblin with the jewels has arrived. This is what we've been waiting for." The goblin didn't fully understand what was waiting for him. All he went for was the smell of the jewel. Found it. Everyone rejoiced in their own way. The goblin because it was his passion. The frog because this ordeal would soon be over for her. But also Jake, because he had found the one who was hidden. Well, out of nowhere, another huge evil and incredibly strong goblin has appeared. Looks like he's protecting his own. Didn't have to wait long. It gets stronger up to level 4? Is it really a goblin? With burning eyes, he narrated. Well, Jack was prepared for that. Still, if everything goes according to plan, I may well be able to catch him, the player shared with the frog. The goblin was so angry that his claws flew ahead of him. You could get a good look at that gorgeous manicure. Jack used everything he could. Here in a minute, a huge wave of fire is flying at the goblin. But Jack hides from it. It's nice that Jack hasn't forgotten about Do-shun. He's already given her permission to undo the gold coloring. In just a second, the goblin knows he's been smashed. "You did a good job," he said to the frog in a hug. Now he knows he can't survive without her. The goblin quickly woke up and struck again. He felt cheated, so he was serious. While the goblin was preparing his attack, opened a new inventory. This time, it was a mysterious potion. Of course, he tried to beg the goblins for jewelry. As soon as one jewel was gone, the goblin became small again. Then a clue popped out to Jack that if the jewel disappeared, the goblin's enhancement would disappear along with it. This was a marvelous fact. Jack was looking at him very differently now. But the fight went on, for he needed a victory to move on. That was easy enough. Jack had done it without much blood loss on the goblin's part, and if noticed, Jack himself remained uninjured. That wasn't the end of it, though. He needed to keep going through this section. Otherwise, it would be a failure. Now it was complicated by the fact that he needed to seek adventure on his own. It turned out that what he got from the goblin had 3 players of great value. The thing itself is cool, but the contents are even more important. He shared his findings, and Jack had new gifts. He got a skill book. There were reinforcement cubes. He also got a soul stone. Now he could collect something interesting. Only Jack didn't understand why he needed the soul stone. Even looking at his explanation, I can't understand it, and my eyes don't react much. It seemed to be the first time in the whole game that he thought he had gotten an unnecessary thing. However, there was also something that really appealed to Jack. Runes are a place that is unlocked under special conditions or rights to it. But jewelry is too appealing, he said with restrained drooling. However, can only be obtained at the site for development? Yes, and the pieces including only 3. Na began to ponder the player. So, they're on the 7th, 8th, and 9th floors. Can they be obtained if you kill the boss monster? The thought did not leave him, and while our fighter was enjoying his freedom, he decided to check the reaction to his publication. Wow. And the reaction to the publication about the white crane is not as good as I expected. Upset, poor guy. Jack himself couldn't decide how he felt about the situation. It may erase memories, but many people survived because of it. So, is it worth disliking? It was all more a moment of reflection. However, there were those who supported him. Oh, the man with the bald head. If you look at it that way, Lick My Head and Meow Meow Punch didn't eat her either. These facts could not please our hero. He was drowning community messages. What? Is this bald head making a fuss in the square? And he's crazy. Oh, these words may have raised many questions. So he let it pass him by. He was interested in what the bald head was saying. He was interested in much more than that. He looked up everything he was interested in and prepared for a new challenge. Well, he exclaimed, realizing that his rest was over. Here the 8th floor opened before our team. Having the experience of the past, they already know that it will not be so easy. But it's all experience to become super strong. Jack was immediately attacked by a pack of orcs. All of them were with their weapons, angry, hungry, powerful. The player had to defeat them all. He was already expecting them, and you could say he was glad to see them. Hello, fellow orcs. He greeted them, even though it was a bit rude. But Jack was getting cocky every game. He began slicing in half anyone who came near him. Those huge orcs weren't so powerful anymore. While he was splitting in half, his beginner's kit effect started to work. It was the one that gave Jack the extra strength. He looked at the pack of stacked orcs and didn't realize who it was that was addressing him. It seemed that he had already defeated them all, but he was in for a huge surprise. As soon as Jack turned around, he saw an extremely tall orc. He was so big that he was covering the sun. In addition, he was so angry that Jack had killed all of his brethren that he was ready to do away with him at once. Except the player wasn't quite ready for that. He was so frightened that he didn't realize it was standing in front of him. But there was no time for reflection. Since the huge monster had a thirst for revenge, it was important to him to avenge his own. The monster turned out to be a gentleman and threw him a challenge. With a flick of his hand, he threw his glove to the floor, thereby challenging Jack to a duel. The player was confused and didn't know what to do, so the tower gave an answer of its own and allowed the duel. Just in seconds, a field was formed around them on which they would fight. The monster's support group gathered around. At the very beginning, Jack didn't realize what was happening. Is he showing off his muscles? Disconcerted by what was surrounding him, the fighter didn't like him right away. Jack found his opponent repugnant. As the fight began, Jack began to use his powers. The first thing he used was acceleration. It should help him but carry the punch quickly. Immediately after the blow, this huge org turned into a little troublemaker that was worth defending. Jack felt that this fight would give him an easy time. And that was easy. Jack did not hide his joy. But practice had already shown that this was usually only the beginning. At least our player managed to take his medals from the goblin. Jack was already too fond of trophies and everything connected with them. Jack immediately got the instructions on what it was in his hands. As it turns out, it's a medal from the native Tooth tribe. They even have their badge on the medal itself. Svedu, it was something unremarkable. I think it's a trinket. We could sell it at the store, right? Ventured Jack. While he was strolling in himself quietly, the tower gave him a new idea. Our player is very fond of excitement. That's why he agrees to the new conditions. Jack no longer thought he had found the trinket. Things turned out to be a bit more mysterious. I thought it was a trinket, but after putting it in a bottomless bag, shared the fighter as he read the message from the tower. The next one struck him even more. Due to the appearance of a new strong man, the warriors of each clan are being summoned. Was it really about Jack? He was already scared shitless. Immediately, everything around him began to cramp up, screaming. He no longer felt safe where he was. He was being blown away, either by the wind or by the monster's breath. But it wasn't like a sea breeze. And now, there were 3 huge giants standing in front of him, ready to fight him. Except that Jack himself was not sure that he wanted to fight them. But his desire to conquer the tower wins out. Siu, the warriors were so excited that a strong man had appeared that they were also a little surprised at what was happening. Jack thought it was crazy. He didn't like the way the warriors looked at him. He demanded to be treated differently. He even yelled at them. No, look at me with those eyes. He even tried to hide from embarrassment. But in the open forest, it was simply impossible. There were more of them every minute. There was no point in running. Jack felt a special tension. Each of the warriors stared at the player, as if he had some kind of show to put on. And at the end, they would all smack him down. But something strange was happening for Jack. They all started making some kind of gesture at the same moment, and most importantly, they were looking right at the victim. Could this be the beginning of a farewell dance? Although Jack began to remember. Wait a minute, he uttered. Even the frog's hair began to stand on end. Each of the warriors prepared his shiny, polished gun. They are ready to go into battle. But Jack didn't just walk through each of the floors for nothing. He already knew he had to attack first, and that's why his sword was already flying at the first monster. Here you go, you pigs! The player made a show of it. The others tensed up a bit, but no one left. Everyone would stand until the end. He's ready to fight. So he happily responded to anyone who approached him. Jack didn't care about their size. He believed in his own strength. Aha! Aha! Pounce! To him, it was all a game. To them, it was revenge. That's why Jack was enjoying what was happening. All these big, menacing, radiating evil monsters one by one on the poor guy. It seemed like the player didn't stand a chance. That's why the seagull got an improvement cube. Everyone was keen that his progress through the pro floors should continue. One by one, Jack managed to strike. Each of the green monsters took damage. As soon as all of them were on the ground, their rock immediately began to do a footwork. One could only see the heels sparkling. Before doing so, he of course collected the medals. Phew. Even for him, it wasn't very easy. As soon as the medals were in hand for Jack, a commotion started in the grandstand. Is it over already? They wouldn't subside. Everyone was demanding a sequel, and the station provided it. Right in the center in front of the check, a giant monster appeared. At first, it appeared to be sleeping. However, Jack had to deal with him. It was the great tribal leader. He is also the monster boss of the 8th floor. He possessed low physical strength, solid music, and of course, his skill was resilience. Looking at him, it was hard to believe that frail Jack could win. Is he asleep or something? The player couldn't understand. His gaze was filled with fear, but he wasn't going to give up. And while he sat calmly on his throne, Jack tried to attack him from all sides. He wanted to use the orb. There was so much fire that the rock next to it began to melt. But did it affect the driving in any way? Phew, is it destroyed? He hoped for a quick reprisal. The frog was shocked at her master's behavior. It could not believe that he could attack someone who was sitting quietly and carrying no threat. As soon as the fire passed, he saw what had happened. Everything around was burning. The smell of the fire did not subside, but he was still sitting there. Oh shit! The seat's gone and I've fallen over! He couldn't believe his eyes. This only woke and enraged the chief. A blue fire immediately lit up in his eyes. He was already geared up for battle. He was ready to wipe the little one to dust. The chieftain didn't like his sleep being disturbed by someone. Everything around him began to touch. But Jack continued to not understand what was going on. It would seem that the monster should now be attacking him. But it was as if it didn't notice him. They just looked at each other, each minding his own business. As if the chief's business was to keep calm, Jack's department to attack. And while the player stood and watched what was going on, the chief reported, "Today is my leg exercise day." He walked over to his exercise machine and began to exercise. He was so strong that even his barbell could not withstand this arm strain. Everything crumbled under him. Because you interfered, it was too late. But blame the chief, for he could no longer exercise. The stones beside him roofed everything around him. The moment the chief turned to Jack, it was no longer the kindly man he had seen at once. It was a vicious monster with a lust for death. There was a current emanating from his weapon. In addition, the chief used his roar, and he was temporarily paralyzed. "Just because of some roar, the body is paralyzed?" said Jack with a surprised chain through his teeth. The chief studied the player standing before him. From the roar, everything seemed to freeze. Has it succeeded? Did not leave the fighter's attempted attack. He was extremely curious as to what would result from it. Time after time he made the attack, and each time he was met with a counterpunch. His ball was no match for his axe. Now the chief takes a swing at Jack. He might not have survived a blow like that, but until the smoke clears, it's hard to know what's going on. One thing is certain, he's in pain. Well, Jack's strong enough to withstand these blows. And while the smoke doesn't see him, he uses these moments to come up with a new plan. Level 3 speaks for itself. It's different from that fish head. He can already feel the difference between the strength of the monsters. Well, he's been preparing for this. Suddenly he kept attacking. With each blow, his strength was getting greater. The wave of his anger might not even neutralize some fighter, but not ours. The chieftain pounded the ground all the way to hell, where the fire was coming from. It was clear that he was stronger, and had every chance of winning. Jack was quickly preparing an attack in return for him. With each one, he hoped it would do some damage to him. Throwing fireballs at the leader, he hoped it would help him win the battle. Everything was out the window, even Jack could reach the flames. Firebomb is only level B. Jack was happy to see how much flame he was giving off. And only Dokchun didn't feel safe. However, it didn't work on the chief either. He was already preparing another attack on Jack, so Jack shouldn't have been too happy about it. It was only a few minutes after the smoke had gone out that he saw that the chief had gotten nothing. That only the dueling square had been damaged. Each time the boss monster grew angrier. He wanted to do to the little flea. The chase began, as Jack ran out of ideas of what else to attack with. The faster the player ran, the faster his end seemed to come. In a moment, Jack was flying downward. The chief's spear was right behind him. He was backed into a corner. Didn't know what to do next. Here stood right in front of him, ready to crush him. If the attacks don't work on him first, Jack said. He was up to something, and the interest in the fight was only growing. Bets could be placed. The chief underestimated his opponent. He was always ready to respond to his attack. And while the player was thinking up a new plan, the chief was preparing an attack. He was actively attacking the flea. Did he forcibly remove his paralyzation and dispel the smokescreen, you fucking monster? It was pointed out to Jack that he wouldn't find his way out again. It seemed that whatever he came up with, the chief could turn to his side. My better attack, Firebomb, is the same for him as the enhancement skill. It seemed nothing could damage him. The fighter's ideas were running out. His eyes came to his aid. They told him where the monster's weakness was. The back? The back is the weak spot? Now it was only a matter of time before Jack used that information. But what can be done about it? It's just not unattainable, it seemed for the player. But all he had to do was come up with a new plan. His assistant helped him with that. What? You say take the abilities and? Jack continued. Dokchun told him her idea. They came up with the idea of committing the influence of the ability. They already knew that they had used it before, and it worked well. It was ingenious. They said right that you can combine with gels and create a new one? If so, we can find a new way out. Now it seemed like there was a chance. Is that the Escalope fusion my eyes advise? Jack confirmed. He was again determined to win. While Jack was devising a new plan, the monster was watching him and preparing his attack. He was not to let his guard down, for as soon as he was distracted, the monster struck again. It seemed to pierce all the way to the player's heels. To say the egg was in pain is an understatement. He felt as if his soul had been beaten out of him. Well, there was a surprise for the monster. Usually, players die at this point. Now the green giant himself was on fire, either from anger or rage. But this was a new attack. It seemed like the situation was only gaining momentum. After a moment, Jack saw that the monster was no longer so active. The evil monster wasn't so evil anymore. Its fire had died down. When Jack saw that, he realized he had killed it. He felt like a king. He stood on the slain chief and yelled, "Victorious!" It was a tough fight, but the player made it through. Did I really win? A real level 3 monster is so strong. The host shared his worries with the frog. He was powerless. He needed time to recover. Just as suddenly, the tower began to welcome Jack. It was time to hand out the rewards. But the player was so powerless, he even forgot about it for a moment. The piece of key. This was his new reward. And it really does appear after defeating the boss on every floor. No one deceived him in this. If you add the piece of key obtained on the 7th floor to this, the player suggested, then they would be combined. He kept all his finds in a pouch. As soon as he put these key pieces together, the key immediately let him know that they were genuine. However, they were not all the pieces. I don't know where they are, but I will surely find them. Wait for me, treasure. His excitement was unbeatable. He lusted for treasure, blood, and power. Then, to quench Jack's ardor, a new notice came to him. Oh, that's right, there's one more reward left. And at once he turned on the continuation of the game. It was important to him to collect all that the tower could give. Something incomprehensible happened. It was a new reward. Jack didn't understand why some crap had appeared from his lab. This was the thing to eat. Dokchun was shocked at what was happening. It wasn't something sweet and pleasant. So the player said, if it's to become strong, then I can do anything. With his whole appearance, he showed that whatever came his way, he could handle it. While Jack rejoiced in his gift, the frog watched what was happening. Behind Jack, the chief stepped up. It seemed that he only had to clip to hurt his surroundings. What do you think, Dokchun? Unsuspecting, the host asked. Although there was already a smell of fried food nearby, Everyone kept calm. Jack was unrecognizable. He wasn't the same guy anymore. There was a black liquid spreading over his face. His eyes were crazy. Dokchun didn't like all this at all. She started to bring him to his senses. One by one, Jack received a blow from his frog. He wasn't expecting this at all. "Why are you beating me?" he asked. "What? It smells like shit, so shut your mouth?" He wasn't expecting this conversation at all. Jack was already starting to get angry with her. Night came. They decided to make a prevol. It's so good to nibble on stuff. If there are points, money is the best thing here too, remarked the player. He was a materialist. That's why it was important for him to collect all the treasures. "Let's eat, Dokchun," he suggested to his frog. A hearty dinner awaited them. They were happy. Then Jack thought about writing about his passage. He wanted to combine the pleasant with the useful to do it during the meal. Points? Doesn't go up as fast as I expected," shared the host. He was frustrated with this course of action. He was confident that if he kept doing this, it would clearly go up. As he was flipping through the feed, he noticed a familiar name in the popular posts. "Wow, he really is crazy," Jack commented. "They didn't even block off the square like they did during the bald head. Why?" All of which set the player thinking again. He continued to watch, but the questions stopped more and more. He trashed a guest house, the property of a major guild, for no particular reason? Why would he? Realized the player. Leafing the tape further, he noticed that he had a fight with the manager. This was completely new information to Jack. It seemed like someone was repeating it. He wondered if the man had gone upstairs. He wondered before the office who it was that Baldhead was. He felt that the creep was going up just for him. He knew he was being hunted. That's why, Jack decided, he needed to get stronger soon. The recruitment of a novice has already become known, so surely we will meet when he gets stronger. Not only him, but also the other members of the big guilds. Jack pondered. He remembered his fight with the manager. He knew he would come after him. Jack decided then that he didn't have time to chat anymore. He needed to act so that when they came for him, he would be ready. He took his frog, and they moved forward. Jack had more than one more battle to get stronger and prove he was a true warrior. In another section, the manager had already caught up with the goblins. He was destroying them one by one. This was a sign that Jack would be next. The manager was even angrier this time. Jack had defeated him, and that had never happened before. Goblins were dying at the speed of light. Even at some point they wanted to help. There were many of them, so it was necessary to deal with each one separately. Oh crap! That means that the information from the Cliché Princesa was true, so the words from the tutorials too? The first time the manager suspected that what he believed might not be true. The further he moved, the more doubts he had. It wasn't that long ago, but my memories are getting murkier. It seems the talk of white grail and memory loss is true after all. The man became indignant. How on earth did she find out about it? And why is she telling everyone and not keeping it a secret? Did not understand the manager? Amused that he imagined the author to be a little girl? However, when Jackie was thought of, O knew about it for sure. There was an incredible fight ahead between a strong man and a newcomer. Jack's new opponent was a man who had once climbed up to the 39th floor. Yes, the higher Jack climbed, the more enemies he had. Everyone from the government and the guild wanted him to stop telling everything about his passage. The more he talked, the angrier his opponents became. Someone was waiting for him upstairs and longed for him to come up. Then the real reckoning would come upon him. Meanwhile, the manager was reconstructing in his mind how Jack had managed to straighten him out. He remembered that Jack had taken his skins. Except he wanted them back for himself. The manager whispered he was already too close. AJ didn't even realize it. Summoning all the energy he had, he moved forward. Jack was just finding the corpses of the green goblins. His sword was completely covered in blood. He was already easily handling quite what the 8th floor offered him. Now we can go up to the 9th floor, but it's still the last floor of the development section, so it will probably be difficult. Should I prepare and check the artifacts? He had a completely different approach to his tasks. He was growing up in front of his eyes. As soon as Jack moved on, the towers threw him a new task. A wolf massacre. Horned wolves or something. Jack had no idea what awaited him. They were worth fearing, if only because they spit poisonous drool. Also, not huge and strong. Jack immediately realized that he needed to be careful. Walking through the forest, he scrutinized carefully everything ahead. Suddenly, Right in front of his eye, he stopped the horn. It was so unexpected that Jack almost lost his sight and clues. Turns out they have a weaker base power than the orcs, Jack managed to note. However, that didn't mean it was going to be easy. Wolves, of course, walk in packs, so as soon as Jack had dealt with one, the next wolves started attacking him. The player immediately remembered how in the beginning he fought with his first wolves. A lot of time and fights had already passed since then. Now Jack was already a very different warrior. However, there was something about them that alarmed the player. He should have been more alert than ever, for until he knew what he was dealing with, he could not be safe. Jack only had time for me, leaning out of the way of blows. He does it so fast it seemed double. He kept killing the wolves one by one. It was a little easier than fighting the boss monster. You have to hand it to his enemies, the wolves. Once they started acting like a team and started doing the legwork. At one point, he was standing right on their fangs. They growled, threatening him with retribution, but stood there like a king. "That's why I need to deal with you soon, right?" the Czech warned them. He knew he had a new adventure ahead of him. He knew the guild government wouldn't just let him tell the truth. His power, and attacked all of them at once. There was a super drastic amount of blood around. Jack was no longer as kind as usual. So the guilds must have already located him. I mean, the control intensified when I first got to the 6th floor, Jack said. He knew exactly what was coming for him. It was only a matter of time before he was killed. To prevent that from happening again, we need to get to the 10th floor as soon as possible, was Jack's plan. And though he did not know what awaited him further up the floors, he saw that he could handle anything that came his way. He couldn't wait to talk about the 9th floor. He knew that the other players believed him and were only going up the floors because of his stories. The safety zone on the 10th floor is important, so it's not even comparable to the 6th floor, so there's no way I can stay, said the hero. Of course, the thought of reprisal made his knees shake, so he strove to say goodbye to the wolves as quickly as possible. It was not difficult for him. It was a matter of time. Then, to speed up the process, Jack used his tricks. He attacked them with a fireball. But Jack was distracted. Qualification? He wondered. What is it? No longer owned the situation, as he didn't understand what was going on. He didn't understand where all the wolves had gone, and why it was suddenly dark. He stood alone in total darkness. He couldn't see anything, so he had to trust only his gut, and it told him it wasn't safe. Jack and the frog tensed up. A monster of some kind suddenly appeared in Jack's face. Such a turn he had not expected. "Ow!" Jack screamed. He didn't know what to do. It turned out there were ghosts around, who know how to scare. Besides finding them, he had to deal with them. Well, how can you do that if you can't see them in the dark? In small movements by feel, Jack found one by one and destroyed it. However, this tutorial held new surprises for the fighter. It went through the body, felt Jack. This was something new. "What the? He doesn't give a shit," he said. All his efforts were in vain. No matter what he did, this infestation was alive and invisible. This made things difficult for the player. After a bit of brainstorming, Jack realized, he's just a monster creating atmosphere. The player was glad that now he knew who he was dealing with. Then my eyes told me, normal attacks don't work on them. They suck out some of their abilities too. This made Jack angry. He had worked so hard to collect everything, and some monsters can take it all away. As soon as Jack looked up, he saw that there were more of them. "And what does it mean that the seal has weakened?" awed the player. "These creeps are taking my strength." Felt boy. He was becoming weak. His fervor was waning. But Jack was not one to give up. He began to run swiftly down the stretch. Monsters attacked him from all sides. Then Jack used a firebomb. "Here you go," he shouted. He continued running forward, but had time to glance back to see if the attack had worked. Did it work? Jack asked. But it had no effect. The monsters both followed him and continued to follow him. It seemed like they weren't just taunting the player. "Even magic skins don't work? This is an absolute fraud," shouted Jack. He was running out of ideas of how to deal with them. The monsters were catching up to him, wrapping around his legs to break him. This was a serious fight that Jack was unprepared for. In this fight, only the monsters knew what to expect from them. Jack plowed sharply to the ground. It seemed to be the first time in a long time that anyone had been able to stop him. A new plan had to be thought of. Even the frog that always sat on his neck flew upward. She hadn't expected this turn of events herself. "Dok Chun!" he shouted. Master couldn't allow some nasty monsters to massacre his pets. Perhaps for her sake alone, he was willing to go to extreme measures. The monsters actively began to intimidate the frog. Even she couldn't get her bearings and figure out what to do, although we know she could easily intimidate them. No! Jack tried to stop them. The monsters above the frog were getting bigger and bigger. Already no one saw a way out of this situation. For the first time in ages, Jack's tears flowed in real tears. The pet he'd first wanted to give up was in the clutches of the monsters, and he didn't know what to do about it. And while he was killing himself, the frog began to worry about himself. The monsters abruptly began to run away. Jack looked around and saw that his pet was emitting an incredible power that made the monsters start to die. "Daughter boy, you're the best!" exclaimed the master. However, it was a mystery to him how this happened. He demanded an answer from the frog. How did it happen that a fighter failed and some frog could do it? Then it demonstrated, again, its saliva. This time it was a very happy frog, for it had saved its master again, and herself. The monsters were still trying to get close to them, but the frog was getting the better of them. And so one by one, Do-chun tackled the monsters. So an attack with a special characteristic will work? Thought Jack. He could have done something like that if he had known about it earlier. And now it came to him that he could help his frog to deal with these monsters. "Wait, in that case, I'll do it too," he said to her. "I think I can hit you." The promo player launched a new attack. This time the monsters felt the power of the fighter. Just when our team realized how to deal with these monsters, they connected again. The frog jumped on its master, bypassing all the monsters. Now they are together again. Take took out all his treasures, activated them, and launched a joint attack. This had never happened before in this game. Jack was already pissed off. It seemed like the monsters had sucked everything they had out of him. "Oh shit," the fighter muttered. He lay on the ground with no strength. "I tried so hard, but the seal is broken. Definitely need a weapon. A weapon in which to place the sacred power and strike with it," was his new plan. "Barehanded too, of course," Jack said, launching a new attack. Of course it did some damage to the monsters, but they were still alive. But because I'm only holding it in one hand, too many blind zones are formed. If I had a weapon, it would be easier, he said. Indeed, while he was striking with one hand, a new pack of monsters attacked him from the other side. Then, Jack had a brilliant idea. "We should look in the store. There is no for something that can upgrade a piece of key weapon." Perhaps this is something that no player has ever done before. While Jack was going to his store, Horned Wolf came to the monster's aid. "Oh, Horned Wolf," Jack said sadly, for he realized that he could not get to the next floor, and if he destroyed everyone in the area. While Jack was confused, the wolf didn't waste a second, and began to attack the player. At this moment, Jack got a brilliant idea to help him with this task. He greeted the wolf with a hug. "Horny wolf, I missed you so much," Jack said, even with a little tracing. It was some new fancy trick. Well, it was all part of his plan. "Yeah, this is it. Monsters are supposed to be so you can catch them, right?" he began to explain. However, this wasn't just a hug. Jackie was looking for the monster's weak spot. Once he found it, he didn't hesitate to crack its spine. That was a sound this lot had never heard before. It's hard to imagine how much pain the wolf was in. At that moment, something switched in Jack's mind. His gaze was too vicious. "Come to me," Jack called out to all the wolves and monsters. "I'll touch you heartily." The wolf fighter continued to dance. But they were not weaklings either, and were not afraid of the player. Then Jack had a weapon that allowed him to deal with a group of monsters at once. "You're all dead!" shouted the fighter cheerfully. The monsters that sucked the strength out of him didn't fully realize what exactly became the end. But they were already frightened, and suspected that they would not just get away with it. Thanks to the weapons, Jack was able to deal with the monsters one at a time. Each one got his own. All of them were defeated. Jack didn't leave anyone alive.